Hi, Sandra Wilson here, clinical hypnotherapist who works with misophonia and extreme sound sensitivity. So I thought today's video it would be quite a good idea to talk about the link between misophonia and trauma, because my background is working with trauma and anxiety. That's what my original specialism was, and indeed I still do work with it. So, as I said, I've worked with it a lot in my practice, a lot of trauma, and as well as misophonia, I am particularly curious about the potential link between both conditions. So first of all, let's just get clear about what trauma is and how it affects the brain and the nervous system. So when we experience something traumatic, some people are lucky enough to be able to process that experience, even if it was super traumatic, and the memory will be filed away in a certain part of the brain. And even though the person may still remember the situation, it's not necessarily going to trigger negative emotions. It's almost like the emotional content has been removed from the memory. So the person who experiences trauma, again, trauma is very different for different people. My version of trauma might not be yours, for example, and we can become traumatized by things that aren't necessarily considered to be hugely traumatic by other people, if that makes sense. So for some people, when they experience a traumatic event, something in the brain does not process it. It doesn't remove that emotional content. So that means that the memory is not kind of processed in a way that will enable them to stop feeling the emotion attached to the memory. So this means that it can linger in the nervous system. Okay, it lingers and causes a lot of havoc with our minds and our bodies. So trauma can live on. Okay, so, and even if it may seem that you have forgotten all about it. So it's a long, long time ago. And it's easy to be triggered every time you hear something that reminds you of that experience. So some people with PTSD, for example, will keep on reliving the memories of the traumas as if they were actually happening, as if they were going through it again. So, and it's not known why some people cope better than others, but for those that don't, our brains can often do weird things to protect us. So there's a part of the brain that still does not believe that you are safe, and it can't really tell the difference between what is happening now and what's happening in the past. So your emotional memory, the survival part of the brain, communicates with you in a way that suggests you are still at risk. So for people who develop misophonia, this signal is likely to be related to a particular sound. So for example, chewing, breathing, eating. And the sound itself does not necessarily have to have anything to do with the original trauma. It's just that fear needs a focus. I mean, sometimes it can be. I mean, I had a client who was able to trace back her disgust of hearing people eat to being with her father when she was sick and laid up in bed. So it really reminded her of a time when she was trapped, not very well, and having to listen to her father slurping soup while she was sick in bed. So if during the traumatic experience a person experienced a loss of control, helplessness or powerlessness in particular, then it's little wonder that your nervous system feels a very strong urge to protect you. So this hypersensitivity is likely to affect other regions of the brain, and it could be that risk is overestimated by the brain, and together with our ability to be able to cope with it. So and that becomes underestimated. So your brain does that to protect you. Trauma which is unprocessed can certainly increase the risk of developing misophonia in some people. Cause and effect still hasn't really been determined, of course, and we're still unclear about exactly why misophonia does develop, but it does appear to be more common in people who have had some kind of trauma in their past, although it's not always absolutely necessary to have had trauma. Some people with misophonia have never had trauma, for example. So for some people, getting professional help with processing trauma can have an impact on misophonia symptoms. So it does make sense that if that is the culprit, that is what we work on first. And I really do hope this makes sense. It's a complex topic, but when you think about it, if your nervous system and the survival region of the brain, which is called the amygdala, is hypersensitive for whatever reason, whether it's trauma or something else, then of course, if you have learned to associate certain sounds with feeling horrible emotions, then that is why it keeps on repeating, okay? It doesn't believe you're safe, even though you know you are. So I hope that's helped, and I'll be back with more content tomorrow. Bye for now.